of Just a Game. I am me, you are you. As you can see, the other host of this show, and actually he's hosted more than I have lately, Danny Austin from Post Media and from Live on the 55 is at or on? At or on?
Live
at
on
55?
On
the
live
55.
from
Yeah,
the
that's
55.
what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm always bad with numbers. We've been awaiting Craig Conroy's first move. We now have it as Tyler Toffoli is ex of the Calgary Flames. He has been traded to the New Jersey Devils for a third-round pick, which is actually Columbus's pick in this draft, and young center winger Yegor Sharangovich. Sharangovich, an RFA. This happening in the last hour or so. So pick number 80, the Flames grab another pick in a deep draft, so they'll be happy about that. We'll interpret the tea leaves in a moment. Toffoli leading the Flames in scoring this past season, and was captain of Team Canada at the World Championships, which won a gold. Very popular player. One that I think didn't spend a lot of time, Danny, in Calgary, just 2 seasons, but came over from the Montreal Canadiens and certainly made himself at home here. I think, as disappointing as this past season was, he was their consistent offensive threat. Ergo, he's their leading scorer. Your instant reaction to this trade?
I mean, is my mic still on? I just want to make sure.
No, you're on. You're good. Oh, great. Sure.
Perfect. My honest reaction is I understand that fans are going to look at this and be disappointed in the return. I think Tyler Toffoli was sort of perceived as being one of the chips where you might be able to, put them in play and bring back probably not a top prospect, but certainly a higher round draft pick. And I think this tells us a little bit about what the market is going to be like for these guys. And that's a bit of a concern, but that's why I think that, you have to consider dealing in bulk at this point and trying to get what you have in return. But Tyler Toffoli is a guy who teams have brought in, teams who have wanted to make the leap. The Flames brought him in before the trade deadline, but last 2 seasons ago, when with Gaudreau, with Tkachuk, it really looked like they were going to be able to make a real run. And they brought him in to sort of get them over the hump. And I think that we've seen that a lot. And I think that he's ultimately came in, did his job. I don't want to call him a mercenary because that's, putting a negative spin on it. But,
but isn't he? Isn't he?
I mean, a little bit.
He's got some stops now, right?
Yeah. Which, there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No, you can make a very good living doing that. And those guys are important. But you'd have to wonder on this, and it's, again, first blush, but on this young Jersey team that's going to have to hand out some pretty significant contracts, if this is a long-term move or if this is a move to kind of throw their chips in the middle of, they got to the second round this year. Is this them signaling that, they're trying to win now?
I think it is. I think it absolutely is. And again, I don't think that they had to give up. If you're a team that, I don't think this is a huge, whether the Flames can use these, both player assets and the draft asset to turn into something productive. It's not a lot to give up if you're the New Jersey Devils. The Devils are going to be very happy with this deal. I think that if we're looking at it from a Flames perspective, Toffoli was probably behind Lindholm and maybe Hanifin, depending on who you talk to. One of the, the players you expected or hoped to get a nice return out of. And right now, this is what we're seeing. This is what the market is dictating, apparently. So I understand there being a little bit of concern in Flamesland.
And there certainly is. If you're using social media as the barometer, there certainly is. A little bit more on Yegor Sharangovich, a late round pick by the Devils, has played the last 3 seasons predominantly in the National Hockey League. 2 years ago, he had 46 points in the same season in which Tyler Toffoli had 49 points. So very similar numbers 2 seasons ago with 24 goals. This year he fell off. The one thing that you did pick up is one of the top penalty killing forwards on one of the top penalty killing teams. He was leading the Devils in forward ice time in terms of penalty killing, and the Devils and the Flames have the same overall penalty killing mark. So he does come in with a little bit of a toolbox. His 24 goal season saw him with a hat trick against Florida. The only reason I know this is I went back and watched. I'm always curious where guys score goals from, and his goals were off the rush and in the slot area. Restricted free agent, as I mentioned, 25 years old. Look, here's the other thing. We all scrambled to find who he was. We all Googled him. We all went to, this is Hockey TV. I use Elite Prospects. We all went to see, and, I did a deep stats dive on him as best I could in the minutes before we got on here, because I want to know who we're talking about. He is a credible NHLer. He has upside, I would suggest. And again, if it wasn't for Toffoli leading the team in scoring this year and having kind of that breakout offensive year, it was kind of a younger version of Toffoli 2 years ago. But I don't think the fact that you only get a third round pick in this and it's a name that we all have to Google isn't going to satisfy a lot of Flames fans.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that, and I'm trying to pull it up right now, just what the Flames had to give up for basically a season and a half of Tyler Toffoli. And I can understand people doing that. So they gave up a first round pick, a fifth round pick. So yeah, so you gave up a first and a fifth. You got a third in return. I know it's not actually the law of averages. I'm just making that up as I go. But it's one of those ones where I think quietly a little bit more critical of Brad Treliving's sort of last couple of years as the GM than most. And I'm still looking at this. I'm like, you know what? They took their shot. Toffoli was one of the better players on the market when that team felt like it could go out the cup, and I still think that you would have made that trade every day. You got a season and a half out of him. He was your top goal scorer. I don't mind the acquisition and what he did for the Flames. And I mean, what worries me about this is if that's what you're getting for Toffoli, what are you getting for Hanifin? What are you getting? This team wants to, if they're dealing away these veteran guys, you want to be dealing them away for as much, high-end talent or possible high-end talent as you can. And if you're getting a third rounder here for Toffoli, who is older than a Hanifin, but what does it signal that we might be looking at?
I would caution that I don't know if it signals anything at this point. Taken alone, I mean, you look at the Dubois trade earlier today with LA and what they got back in terms of, 3 players that played in the NHL, but none of LA's top end prospects, unless you think Gabe Velarde is. And I could listen to that argument, but they didn't give up any of the, the young defensemen that they've got coming in. They didn't give up Quentin Byfield or anything like that. What did Ryan Johansson, what did Sean Durzi get? Sean Durzi got you a second out of Arizona. Again, not defending it. I'm just kind of looking at it as, what are the tea leaves telling me? Of the 7 players that the Flames had identified as, needing new contracts in a year from now, not allowing them to walk away, Toffoli's in that group along with Backlund, and we know all the others, right? Tyler Toffoli was always a nice to have, but not a must have if you were doing up your list, right? Who would you want to sign out of that group? Hanifin, the centerman, Lindholm, Backlund's nice. Tanev gives you, again, Toffoli, you use the word mercenary. I don't think mercenary is the right word, but it's apt. Like, he's a guy that fills an offensive gap for a team. But you were talking about Brad Treliving. When Brad Treliving gives up a first, my assumption is he feels like, okay, we got him on a good contract and we'll be able to keep him, locked up on a good deal. This is a long-term play for us. This year happens, and, he's a self-identified Sutter guy. I have no idea if that played a role in him wanting to leave because his coach left. I have no idea about that. But I also don't think he's going to be in New Jersey next year. That's just my interpretation of the tea leaves at this point.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. And I mean, the Sutter thing, I think, has to be brought up. We have no idea how much you're right, but he did say Sutter is the best coach I've ever had. He was one of the guys who came out very firmly in those postseason media availabilities and was very positive about it. So I'm sure it doesn't, when you're saying that and you're trying to see if you're valued and they fire the coach, I'm sure it sends a bit of a signal to you. But I also ultimately think that, I mean, look, I don't know that all these guys want out of Calgary so much as they want out of a situation that looks like it's going to get pretty bad here for a couple of years. And, maybe Craig Conroy has some miracle deal out there that's going to keep them competitive. But I have a feeling that they look that guys like Toffoli, who are, at the age where they've got some years left. I'm not trying to imply that they don't, but they're, getting to the tail end of their career, if not quite there yet. They're looking at it and they're saying, "Okay, are we going to win a cup here?" It's what Michael Backlund said. The only reason Michael Backlund wants to leave is because he wants to win a Stanley Cup, and he can look around and say, "Well, if Lindholm doesn't sign and Gaudreau left and Tkachuk wanted out and all that, I'm not going to win a cup here." So I don't think that this is on any level a referendum on the city of Calgary or even, some things about the organization, so much as it is the position that Brad Treliving built this team, put them in this spot, and ultimately left instead of cleaning up the mess a little bit. But I don't. Tyler Toffoli leaving makes perfect sense. If I was at that age and at that point in my career, and I looked at what the Calgary Flames had, I would want to leave too. And I don't know that it signals. Potentially, it signals that they need a clear cap space as well to make room for a big Elias Lindholm contract. There's there's that possibility. We can't automatically assume that this means Lindholm's gone. Sure feels that way, but there are other options here. But I still think that Tyler Toffoli is exactly what they acquired, gave them exactly what they asked for, and you say thank you, sir, tap him on the helmet, and send him on his way.
But in a again, if this team lived up to its expectations, the conversation about Tyler Toffoli this summer wouldn't have been about leaving. It would have been, how do we keep him, right? How do we keep Hanifin? How do we keep all of these guys? Sorry, you win, and people are going to want to stay. The fact that you didn't win, and you didn't win in such a spectacular fashion, that just scares the hell out of people. To your point, you're closer to this than I am, and I would certainly not punt to you, but I would defer to you that from the outside, even at Christmas time, in the new year, in January, around the trade deadline, when things started to percolate to the top, when the Elliot Friedmans and the Chris Johnsons of the world were saying, "Okay, hold on, something's not right in the dressing room right now," it was really easy to blame the coach. Oh, the coach and the players aren't getting along. As the season wore on and as it ended, I'm left to believe that it was really the coach might have been the catalyst, but it was really a divided locker room. And I'm wondering how much of that possibly is playing into this, is that I just don't want to play with him anymore, right?
The whole thing was the whole thing was miserable, and it felt miserable. Sure. I've been in locker rooms after playoff losses where it was more perky than it was at times in March, in February and January. And what I will say is, truthfully, I also heard those things about there being issues in the locker room, and I don't know if that was Darryl guys versus non-Darryl guys or what it was, but and I never found out who the players were who were not getting along. But something was rotten in the state of the Calgary Flames. There's no question about that. And it's why I strongly disagreed with the people who said, "Oh, these entitled players." I just think it was broken. I really do. And I think there probably should have been a move made on Sutter earlier. But for me, again, this whole mess that's been created, and I don't want to go too hard on the guy because he's gone, and I don't like when media just talk trash about guys after they've left town. But I really think it's odd how Brad Treliving has just gotten away with all of this. If you want to talk about
okay, go ahead.
He the guy who you would have gotten first round assets for, like major pieces, was Matthew Tkachuk. So if this organization is in a spot a year down the road where now they have to, and if you want to call it a rebuild, whatever you want to call it, now they have to deal their veteran or their established NHLers, their stars, and sort of start that process of drafting youth and bringing guys in and hopefully building up. They took a swing at it a year ago, and I'm not saying, obviously hindsight is 2020, and I wasn't saying this a year ago either, but it does feel to me, it's like, well, like Gaudreau leaving, Tkachuk getting traded for current players, signing Kadri to a long-term deal, re-signing Huberdeau before you'd seen him, how he fit into the Sutter system. All of these things put the franchise in the space where they are now.
Right.
and then Brad left. Like,
Right.
I don't,
my counter to that is how much of that was the franchise demanding or asking Brad to do that.
And it's the question we never know, right? It's the answer we never get.
Yeah, it's the answer we never get, but I think we're all smart enough. I mean, if you're, if one of your team presidents is standing up at the podium saying, I'm not allowed to say the R word, and that goes back 10 years to Jay Feaster saying, I'm not allowed to say the R word. There has never been a bona fide burn it to the ground rebuild. It's, the non-expansion teams of the last couple of decades, the only club, with any kind of tenure in the league that's never picked higher than fourth, never picked first overall, never. It's, if it has a failing, it's always too good to be really bad and not good enough to be really good, and kind of stuck in the middle as it always is. I don't believe that Brad hired the last coach. I don't believe that. And I know that there was a lot of, consternation when the thought of losing both Tkachuk and Gaudreau. What are you selling and who are you selling it to? So it was almost celebrated in the fact that there's people that, there's interest again. We can sell tickets. So I defend Brad in that regard, but that's because I think one or both guys having the same opinion, chewing the same bone doesn't make for a good podcast.
And I mean, all of those points are fair. I mean, I would argue that post Iginla, they attempted a rebuild and then they fast forwarded it too quickly when they beat Vancouver, and they should have just sort of stayed the path and developed. Understood that there were going to be some
fair enough, but and to that end, they never saw the high draft pick part of that, right? So you're right. Yeah, yes. I think that's fair. Yeah. That's fair.
But I mean, right now, if you were dealing Toffoli, and I would be shocked. I would if he's the only move that they make in the next 24 hours. Once they've made that move that tells us that, like, no, they actually are. Craig's not lying when he says those 7, they need to give him answers. They need to make he's going to make decisions. So I expect this to be just a flurry of activity. And and this one signals to us what exactly? Yep. They cleared some salary. They got a guy who can still play. As you said, he's pretty good on the penalty kill. We know guys like Trevor Lewis aren't coming back. There's 2 guys who might be traded who are pretty good on the penalty kill. So they're not completely, this is not nothing that they got in return. This is not just a cap clearing move. And I think the next trade, whatever that is, will tell us a little bit more about what the strategy is here and about whether they are willing to do the full teardown.
Agreed. And just to reset, we are reacting to the first move by the Calgary Flames at the Nashville draft, and that is the acquisition of Yegor Sharangovich and a 3rd-round pick from the New Jersey Devils in exchange for Tyler Toffoli. It came on Tuesday afternoon, starting to see a little bit more happening around the league. We saw a fairly significant trade yesterday involving Chicago and the Boston Bruins. We did finally see Dubois getting dealt to LA. Seemed like that one was a slow motion car wreck. You have danced around it. You have brought it up. Let's talk about the R word. Let's talk about rebuild. Because it's certainly something in the lexicon of some fans. It's certainly something that the barn burner guys talk about it all the time. I'm hesitant to talk about it only because I think it's too easy to throw the word out, and it's a whole different thing to have to go through the exercise in the process. And the other thing that kind of binds me a little bit, you mentioned, getting rid of Ginla and Bouwmeester, and, Kiprusoff was gone. So yeah, that was probably the first, but they were bringing in Monahan and they were bringing in Gaudreau, and they went out and got Yuri Oodle, to your point, and things like that. Can this team actually rebuild with $10.5 million going to Jonathan Huberdeau, with Kadri making what he is, and with Markstrom still here? Can you actually be going through that exercise with those guys still on the roster?
Yeah. I mean, if those guys play the way they did last year, you sure can. If Kadri's your first line center and he plays the way he did last year, and you don't have Elias Lindholm and you don't have Michael Backlund, then this team's going to be bad. It's unfortunate that those guys signed up for this situation, but it's the situation that they're in, and they're getting well compensated for it.
Sure.
But even an 85-point Jonathan Huberdeau and a 80-point Nazem Kadri aren't going to get you out of the playoffs. I think that Like,
You don't think they get you into the playoffs? You don't think
no.
if Markstrom has if Markstrom's significantly better, that was a wild ride too. And you get offense production from those guys.
If you're
you don't think this is a playoff team?
If you're subtracting the, let's say, Hanifin, obviously Toffoli, your top goal scorer, Tanev just seems like there's going to be someone out there willing to take him on who's a little bit closer to contention and might not have to play him in all 82 games, so could keep him ready for the back half of the season. And I mean, who else? And you're getting rid of back home. You're getting rid of 4 or 5 of those guys. Then absolutely, I think you can be bad enough. And a rebuild is going to be painful. And everyone says this. I mean, I grew up in Toronto. I was a Leafs fan until I was about 22, 23. Everyone always told me the Leafs can't do a rebuild. That's why they have to trade Tuukka Rask for Andrew Raycroft. All of that. At some point, the only way to really do this is to build from scratch.
Agreed.
Go and get and
we're starting to get some reaction, and sorry to cut you off. We're starting to get some reaction, and I kind of want to filter that in because they're friends of the program. Craig Conroy has spoken, so let's hear about Lindholm first because that question came up in his availability, and this is, I believe, from our friends, Salim, I should say. So still talking with Elias. It's kind of where it's at. Nothing really reported at the moment. So good, bad, or indifferent, right? It is what it is. The weather outside is nice.
Yeah, I will say that I know my colleague Wes Gilbertson is also. I don't know if
we got that one too. Yeah.
I'm just trying to look after him if you have it up. Sorry, I'm just trying to see.
Yep. So again,
out of pick. Yep. Right.
So nothing, yep.
Yeah. And I don't think Conroy is going to come out and show his card right now and say, "Yeah, we're dealing any of these guys." He's not. He's not an idiot. I just don't think that you're dealing Toffoli for that return if you're not planning on dealing at least a couple of the other guys. It's just you could wait. You could wait 12 hours. You could wait for a better deal.
I think Hanifin. Obviously, is going. That's a given. I don't think we talked at all about Zadorov or, you briefly mentioned Tanev. There's some other names in this equation. Michael Backlund is out there. I believe
I'm trying to keep Zadorov. If I'm Craig Conroy, I'm trying to keep Zadorov. He's relatively affordable. And at some point you do need players. Tanev's just the one who, for me, Tanev is just at the age where you're probably not re-signing him. I mean, he's been hurt so much that if you are realistic about where you are and you are not in contention, he has more value to other teams. When a player has more value, that is when those teams are willing to give up their young assets. That's what you try to do.
Yep.
I mean, I'm with the barn burner guys. I've watched them and I've been so grateful that they've been sort of coming in so hard on it. Because I honestly the second that Conroy said in his introductory press conference, we have these 7 UFAs. We are not entering the season with all of those. I think he told us exactly what had to happen. If they said no, they're out. And right now what we're seeing is that other than Lindholm, we know who wants to go. And I think Craig's going to do the smart thing.
Yep. Well, is he? I mean, we've already talked a little bit about social media response to this. There's a lot of people that have looked at this deal and go, that's it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Danny, but I think you kind of had a little bit of that, or, this is pointing in a direction that this is not going to be a competitive team this year.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it is a competitive team this year. I think as of right this second, it's not a competitive team this year. Not a playoff competitive team, not a team that I think can win a playoff round, not a chance. But I mean, again, it's like, okay, well, what more? When they dealt for Toffoli, he had 2.5 years left on his deal?
Yes.
Right? That's what they were giving up the first round pick for. Now he has 1 year left on his 100%. Deal. He's a UFA with them. So you're not getting a first round pick back. So I do think, you might like a little bit better. But I don't know. It's a guy. I actually don't have his stats up, but he's not particularly young and has a year left on his deal. And on a really good team is probably not a first line player. Is probably a second line player. So
I think that was absolutely. I think that's my biggest criticism of this season is, yes, it was a great season for Tyler Toffoli. Yes, he led your team in scoring, but that's the problem. He led your team in scoring, right? He should be a complementary player. He's 31 years old.
He wasn't brought in to play on the first line when they
really significant jump. He had 49 points last year. He goes to 73 points. His next best year was back in 15-16 when he had 58 points. So, he filled in the gap admirably. I mean, they needed scoring and he got them the score. But you're right. When he goes to New Jersey, the expectation there would be second and maybe third line, right? If they're, loading up, if that's what, New Jersey moved Blackwood today, they're going a lot of speculation that they could be a landing spot for Hellebuck, right?
Yeah. And I think Jersey was a good team. Jersey's been a good team. They're trying to take that leap and taking that leap as the Flames found. Sorry, I'm not.
No,
sorry,
we're back.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, like making that leap is really, really hard. The Flames tried to do it, going from being a good team that can't win in the playoffs to being a team that can go on deep runs is really difficult. And Jersey's doing that, or they're trying to do it. And, when it fails the way it did here in Calgary, you always look back with regret and wonder about those first round picks you gave up. But, for all the criticism I was giving Tree Living earlier, and I do think he's been let off the hook in a way that I just can't believe here in Calgary. It blows my mind that he's not held a little bit of accountable for all of this.
By who?
Yeah,
I do believe there is a certain segment of the fans, as there always is. I'm not sure who's letting him off. I mean, I'm letting him off, but I don't count. Who's?
I'm probably referring to people like myself. I'm probably I think that he's been a little bit, a little bit more sort of in the media. I think that we've gone easy on him a little bit more than we maybe do, but it's also weird to criticize a guy who's taking a new job. So there's no real point, and I get it. But I have been.
Don't worry, they'll get him in Toronto.
Yeah,
coming or going, right?
Fine. Well, I don't think he's going to be signing a bunch of guys in their 30s to 8-year deals in Toronto because he'll, I hope he's learned his lesson from that.
Well, I mean, that's what he said. He's got Matthews to sign and he's got Nylander to sign eventually. Listen, we've got a little more Conroy on Yegor if you want it. I think we'll play this and kind of maybe wrap things up unless we bump into another trade here. A shooter, good size, skates well, very good penalty killer. That's a big factor for us. I mentioned it before. He led their team, led New Jersey in shorthanded ice time for forwards. Set one of the better, but tied with Calgary. So, Calgary may need penalty killers, as we've learned here. He had 46 points 2 years ago. Tyler Toffoli had 49 points. This is not a frontline offensive player. 24 goals in the NHL. I apply the David Moss rule. Are you a 20-goal scorer, or did you score 20 goals in the NHL? There's a difference. There is a difference. And he has to prove that he's a 20-goal scorer in the NHL.
Yeah. And, I mean, I don't know if it was the green room or earlier on here, but we were talking earlier. The one thing about this is that this does clear up a little bit of cap space, presumably, right? I mean,
he is an RF. He's currently an RFA. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I don't know. I think that as much as evaluating this deal on its own is fun and important to do, I just think that over the next 24 hours, we're going to be evaluated in the context of everything else, and we'll have a better understanding of what the thinking is.
Yeah,
which is a boring, which is a boring answer, but that's partially
but it's fair. I mean, I'm not, we had that conversation in passing a couple of days ago. Nothing I hate more than whenever this draft is over, draft grades, because I think it's ridiculous, and trade passing and failing on the day of. Kids got to play, and if all of a sudden tomorrow he's the most important thing in the world to some general manager out west, and you package him and you fleece somebody else, and you bring something back, and then you go, well, that was short-lived, right? To your point, you don't know what Hannafin's going to bring you back. You don't know if Lindholm's staying or going. If he's not staying, then you got to think Backstrom's not staying. Backlund, I should say. Yeah, it's lots of shoes to fill. I do like the idea of having another draft pick. I mean, it'd be great if it was a second or a first rounder, but an 80 overall, not bad.
Not bad. And I mean, again, Brad Treliving, I think one of the things he did really, really well was his later round draft pick. So, there's no reason to assume that that's going to be a useless player, because there are plenty of non-first round picks currently skating with the Calgary Flames who are pretty productive, important players.
So Ryan Pike from Flames Nation is down in Nashville. Boomer and Ryan are down in Nashville. They'll have the Barn Burner, a special edition tomorrow at 10:30. Of course, Frank Seravalli and the Daily Faceoff guys are also down in Nashville. I think that'll do it for us tonight. Danny, really appreciate you jumping on short notice. You have a podcast coming up on Thursday, correct? Stamps in action this week, or is it bye for them?
It's a buy for them, but we're going to record tomorrow afternoon. I got John Bender popping by because he has a bunch of memorabilia that he wants to help decorate the studio with. So we'll chat a little bit of the stamps, and then Jerry Modujong, who's my post media colleague out of Edmonton, and I just want to talk because the Elks have had this never-ending home losing streak. So figured let's keep it Alberta tomorrow. But so it's really fun, and it's going to be a busy couple days because I'm also doing obviously Flame stuff for the papers. So it's exciting.
And then these knuckleheads grab you and bring you on while you're trying to eat dinner. I appreciate it, Danny, very much. We're back tomorrow with just a game at 1:00 live. No Peter Marr. I thought we were going to have Peter Marr tomorrow, but we're not because he's vacationing and he deserves that. He'll be back next week. But you can bet we'll have the guys from Nashville down there. Thanks again for everybody who tuned into this very special quick podcast that we threw together. Thanks to Danny and thanks to Jack, our outstanding producer. See you tomorrow, everybody.
Peace.